In the late summer of 1874, a small wagon creaked along a dirt road that did not yet have a name. The road cut through low fields of tall grass and broken fence posts, stretching toward a settlement that barely existed. A cluster of wooden homes stood unevenly along a bend in the river. Smoke drifted lazily from a few chimneys. Chickens wandered freely through the dust. There was no proper town center, no schoolhouse, and no doctor. Only a half-built church. The man guiding the wagon was named Isaiah Booker. He had been born into bondage and freed as a child. Freedom for him had meant moving constantly. It meant never staying in one place long enough for hope to take root. It meant working fields he did not own, sleeping in barns he did not build, and being paid in promises that were rarely kept. Beside him sat his wife, Miriam. She held their youngest child close to her chest, rocking gently as the wagon rattled over stones. The two older children walked beside the wheels, their bare feet thick with dust, their eyes fixed on the white wooden frame of the church rising ahead of them. The church was being built on land donated by a family whose name no longer appears in any surviving record. It was meant to be a place of worship for the growing settlement, a symbol that civilization had arrived on the frontier, a promise that God's presence could tame the wilderness. For Isaiah, it looked like work. He had been told there was labor to be found here, that a preacher was hiring hands to finish the building before winter, that shelter might be provided. Shelter. The word lingered in his mind as the wagon rolled to a stop near the church's foundation. The structure was unfinished. White boards leaned against wooden beams. The steeple frame rose crookedly toward the sky, like a finger pointing upward in warning. A man in dark clothing stepped forward to greet them. His name was Reverend Caleb Whitrow. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself with practiced authority. His hair was neatly combed, his boots polished despite the dirt road. He smiled with his mouth, but his eyes measured the family, as though counting what they could provide. Whitrow spoke gently at first. He spoke of God. He spoke of opportunity. He spoke of service. He told Isaiah there was work to be done, heavy work, stone to move, wood to carry, foundations to be set. Isaiah nodded. He had done worse for less. When Isaiah asked where they might sleep, Whitrow gestured toward the open space beneath the raised foundation of the church. For now, he said, it will be dry, temporary, just until the building is finished. Isaiah hesitated. The space was dark, the earth beneath it uneven. The beams above creaked softly as the wind passed through the unfinished frame. But the children were tired. Miriam's arms were trembling from holding the baby for hours. Temporary shelter was better than none. They agreed.
That night, the family laid their blankets on the dirt floor beneath the church. The boards above them formed a ceiling low enough that Isaiah had to crouch. The sound of night insects filtered through the cracks. The scent of fresh-cut wood mixed with damp soil. Miriam whispered that this place felt wrong. Isaiah told her it was only for a short time. He believed that. The next weeks passed in labor. Isaiah worked from sunrise to dusk. He lifted stone until his hands split. He hammered boards until his shoulders burned. Miriam cooked for the men who worked the site, her movements watched by the Reverend's wife, who corrected her when she seasoned the food too heavily. The children gathered scraps of wood and carried water from the river. They were visible to the town. People nodded at them in passing. Some smiled. Some avoided eye contact. When the church was completed, the bell was rung for the first time. The sound echoed across the settlement. The townspeople gathered. Hymns were sung. The Reverend preached of new beginnings. Isaiah stood at the edge of the crowd, the youngest child asleep against his chest. He waited for someone to tell him it was time to leave the space beneath the church. No one did. That night, the family returned beneath the floorboards. The next morning, Isaiah asked the reverend when they would be moved to proper quarters. Whitrow smiled kindly. "The Lord provides in His time," he said. "For now you are closer to God than anyone else in this town." Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into seasons. The space beneath the church became permanent. Small wooden partitions were added. A crude shelf was built for food. A bucket was placed in the corner for waste. The family learned to move quietly during sermons. The children learned to freeze when footsteps passed overhead. Their world became the space beneath the church. And slowly, without any single moment marking the change, permission to leave the land began to disappear. At first, Isaiah could walk to the river to draw water. Then he was told to send one of the children instead. Then he was told the river was unsafe. Then the basket of food was simply lowered to them from above. When Isaiah asked why they could not come up during services anymore, Whitrow said, "Some congregants find your presence distracting." That was the first time Isaiah felt something cold settle in his chest. But he said nothing, because his family was fed, because the children were alive, because he had learned long ago that questioning men like Whitrow led only to loss. So he lowered his eyes, and the church bell continued to ring above their heads. Time did not move the same way beneath the church. Above them, seasons passed in color. Below them, seasons passed in sound. The family learned the language of footsteps. They knew the weight of the reverend's walk. They knew the hurried steps of children arriving for service. They knew the slow shuffle of old men who stayed late to pray. The floorboards creaked differently depending on who stood above them. In the early years, the children still asked when they could come up and see the sky again. Isaiah told them soon. He always said soon. At first, the children were allowed to step outside before sunrise to draw water from the river. They moved quietly, as if the world itself might punish them for being seen. The air in the early morning was cool, and the sky was wide in a way that made their chests ache. But that freedom did not last. One morning, when the eldest boy returned with water on his shirt, the reverend accused him of wandering. The boy said he had only tripped on the path. The reverend smiled and said nothing more. After that, the water came down in buckets. The family did not leave again. The children grew taller in a place that did not grow with them. The space beneath the church remained low and cramped. Isaiah's shoulders brushed the beams when he stood. The children learned to walk hunched, their spines slowly curving to fit the ceiling. Light came through thin cracks between the boards. Dust fell in narrow shafts when people moved above. The children learned to tell time by the sound of the bell. 1 ring meant morning prayer. 2 rings meant midday. 3 meant evening service. They learned when to whisper and when to stay silent. They learned to hold their breath when the reverend walked overhead. Sometimes the reverend would speak through the floorboards. His voice carried down through the cracks. He told them that God could hear them even in the dark, that God preferred obedience in silence, that suffering brought purity. The youngest child believed him. The eldest daughter, Ruth, stopped believing in God altogether. She began to believe only in walls. Food arrived in baskets lowered through a small opening near the back of the church. It was never warm. Sometimes it was bread so hard it cut the gums. Sometimes it was stew watered thin enough to see the bottom of the bowl. Miriam learned to divide everything evenly, even when the portions grew smaller. She gave the children her share when they cried at night. Isaiah pretended not to notice how thin she was becoming. The Reverend said scarcity was a test of faith. When Isaiah asked for more food, the Reverend reminded him that others in the town had needs as well. The difference was that others could leave their homes to find work. Isaiah could not. The rules that were never spoken. No one ever told the family they were prisoners. There were no chains. There were no locked doors beneath the church. There were only rules that existed in the air. Do not come up during service. Do not speak when footsteps pass. Do not let anyone see you. When one of the younger children laughed too loudly and was heard during prayer, the Reverend came down afterward. He did not strike the child. He knelt. He told the boy that God heard disobedience as noise. That night, the family was not given food. The lesson was understood.
Miriam began to leave small marks on the walls. Not words, small scratches, one for each day. She did not tell Isaiah what they meant. They were not meant to be found. They were meant to remind her that time was still moving, that life was still happening somewhere above them. Sometimes she would press her ear to the ground and listen to the vibration of people walking. She imagined their lives, their kitchens, their beds, their windows. She imagined doors that opened outward.
The youngest child, Samuel, was born beneath the church. He had never seen open sky. When he was old enough to speak, he asked why the light above them was broken. Miriam did not know how to explain cracks in a ceiling to a child who did not know ceilings were not supposed to be there. Samuel asked why other children's voices sometimes passed overhead. Isaiah told him they were angels. The lie tasted bitter. Samuel believed him. One night, Samuel climbed onto a crate and pressed his eye to a gap in the floorboards. For the first time in his life, he saw faces looking down. He screamed. The Reverend came down after service. The Reverend did not punish Samuel. He looked at Isaiah and said, "Children are curious. Curiosity leads to sin." The next day, the gap was sealed.
It was during a storm that Isaiah finally understood they were never meant to leave. Rain beat against the church roof. Thunder rolled so loudly that the beams above them shook. Water seeped through the cracks in the floorboards and dripped onto the dirt below. Miriam wrapped the children in blankets. Isaiah went to the opening and called up for help. No one answered. The rain continued. The space flooded ankle deep. The children cried. Isaiah shouted until his voice broke. The door above them opened only after the storm had passed. The Reverend stood at the opening, dry and composed. "You should have prayed," he said. That night, as the family wrung water from their blankets and tried to sleep on wet ground, Isaiah stared at the ceiling. For the first time, he did not think of this place as shelter. He thought of it as a grave that had not yet been filled.
There are moments in captivity when hope becomes dangerous, not because it fails, but because it makes you move. For years, Ruth had learned to be still. She moved only when told. She spoke only when spoken to. She folded herself into the narrow space beneath the church as if she had been born to fit there. But memory is stubborn. It does not stay quiet just because silence is safer. Ruth remembered sunlight, not clearly, not brightly, but enough to know that the darkness beneath the floorboards was not the world's natural shape.
She remembered her mother's laughter from before the road with no name. She remembered water that moved without being poured into buckets. She remembered walking without listening for footsteps overhead. Those memories did not fade, they sharpened. It was late summer when the air beneath the church grew thick and damp. The walls held heat. The floorboards trapped it. The family lay awake, listening to the low murmur of voices above them as townspeople lingered after service. Ruth watched the shadow of feet pass back and forth through a thin crack in the wood. She waited. When the bell rang its final note of the evening, she knew the church would be empty soon. Isaiah and Miriam slept lightly now. They had learned to wake at every sound. Ruth moved without waking them. She had memorized the weak points in the foundation. She had noticed where water seeped through during storms. She had felt where the stone loosened with time. She slipped through a narrow gap at the back of the space, a drainage opening never meant for people. The night air hit her like cold water. She froze. For a moment, she could not move. The open sky felt too large. She had grown up measuring space in inches. The world outside measured it in miles. Then she ran. Ruth ran into the trees. Branches cut her skin. Roots caught her feet. The ground rose and fell in ways she was not used to. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she was moving away from the place that had swallowed her childhood. She did not know the forest was known to the men who hunted in it. She did not know the dogs were kept for this reason. The sound came first, low, then closer. She stumbled. She tried to climb. Hands caught her ankles and pulled her back down into the dirt. She screamed once. It was the first full scream she had made in years. The men did not strike her. They did not need to. They wrapped her in a coat and walked her back toward the church, as if returning something that had been misplaced.
The Reverend did not shout. He did not raise his voice. That frightened Ruth more than anger would have. He brought her before the family beneath the church. He spoke calmly. He said that wandering led to danger, that danger led to sin, that sin spread like disease. Then he said the family would be given time to reflect. The baskets of food did not come down that night, nor the next, nor the next. The children cried quietly. Samuel whimpered until his voice failed. Isaiah begged. The Reverend said nothing. On the third day, Miriam could no longer stand. She pressed her forehead to the dirt floor and whispered prayers that no one answered. When food finally came, it was less than before. No one spoke of escape again. But something had changed. People in the settlement had seen Ruth run. They had seen men bring her back. They did not ask questions. On the frontier, questions made trouble, and trouble made enemies. The church was respected, the Reverend was trusted, and the family beneath the floorboards was considered strange at best, inconvenient at worst. Some townspeople told themselves the family chose that life. Some told themselves it was not their place to interfere. Some did not think about it at all. Silence is not empty. It is filled with decisions.
After Ruth's return, Isaiah changed. He stopped asking for anything. He stopped speaking unless spoken to. He moved as though the walls themselves might hear him. At night, Miriam could feel his body shake beside her. He did not cry. He did not speak. He simply lay awake, staring at the floorboards above them. The sound of footsteps became unbearable. Each step reminded him that the world continued without them, that life was happening just inches away, and that he had allowed his children to be swallowed by a place that had never been meant to hold them. It was Miriam who acted, not by running, not by speaking, but by teaching. She taught Samuel words she remembered from her own childhood, not scripture, names of things, tree, river, sky. She described what these things were like. She told him the sky was not always gray, that water could move without being carried, that trees did not grow from ceilings. Samuel listened with wide eyes. For the first time, the world beneath the church was not the whole world. That was dangerous knowledge. Not long after Ruth's return, a traveler stopped in the settlement. He stayed the night near the church. In the quiet, he heard movement beneath the floorboards. Not prayer, not rats, voices. He asked about it in the morning. The townspeople said the church had old foundations. They laughed. The traveler did not. He left that afternoon. Weeks later, the first questions arrived from outside the settlement. They were quiet questions, but they were questions nonetheless.
Rumors do not arrive loudly. They seep. A traveler spoke to a trader. The trader spoke to a woman at a river crossing. The woman mentioned it to her brother, who worked supply routes between settlements. No one used names. They only said that there was a church where voices came from the ground. In places like this, rumor could be as dangerous as truth. It drew attention, and attention was what the settlement had avoided for years. The night the church burned began like many others. The air was heavy. The sky pressed low over the settlement. The bell rang for evening prayer. Isaiah and Miriam listened to the familiar sounds above them. The children lay close together. Then thunder split the sky. The strike came without warning. Lightning hit the steeple. The sound was not sharp, it was deep. The church shuddered. Dust fell from the floorboards into the space below. The children screamed. Smoke followed. At first, the family thought it was another storm. Leak. Then the air turned bitter. Miriam smelled burning wood. Isaiah pressed his hands against the beams. They were hot. The fire spread fast through the dry boards. Above them, people shouted. The bell rang once, then fell silent. The family did not know where to run. The only exit was blocked by falling debris. Smoke poured into the space beneath the church. The children coughed. Miriam wrapped wet cloth around their mouths. Isaiah beat against the boards with his hands until his palms split. The world above them roared. Then came the sound of breaking wood. A section of the floor collapsed. Light poured down into the space beneath the church for the first time in decades. Not filtered, not thin, full daylight. The townspeople saw the hollow. They saw the shapes of people inside it. They saw blankets, buckets, crude partitions, and the dark stains of long habitation. For a moment, no one moved. Men pulled the children up first. The children did not resist. They did not reach for the sky. They clung to each other as though the open space might swallow them. Miriam was lifted next. She blinked against the light. Her eyes had learned darkness. Isaiah came last. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the church, the place that had been shelter, the place that had become a cage, now burning. People stared. No one spoke. Some covered their mouths. Some turned away. The fire crackled behind them, and for the first time the family stood on open ground with nothing above their heads. The sheriff arrived late. By the time he did, the fire had eaten most of the church. Only the steeple frame remained, blackened against the sky. The sheriff asked questions. Where had they lived? How long had they been there? Why?
The family did not answer, not because they could not speak, but because they had learned that speaking changed nothing. The townspeople filled the silence for them. They said the family had been helping with maintenance. They said the space beneath the church had been used for storage. They said they had not known anyone lived there permanently. The sheriff wrote things down. He did not write the truth. When the fire cooled, a few men went down into the hollow. They found scratches on the walls marking days, small wooden toys made from scrap, bedding worn thin by years of use, a place where a child had pressed his face against the floorboards. These details did not reach any official record. They were spoken about quietly, then not spoken about at all. That night, the family was placed in a shed at the edge of the settlement. The sheriff spoke with the reverend. They spoke in low voices. The reverend said the family had chosen their way of life, that they had been cared for, that they were not prisoners. The sheriff did not argue. He said only that it was an unfortunate arrangement. The next morning, the family was taken away in a wagon. No destination was recorded. The land where the church stood was sold within the month. The hollow beneath it was filled with dirt and stone. No marker was placed. The fire was listed as an accident. Years later, people in nearby settlements spoke of the fire. They did not speak of the family. They said the church had burned in a storm. They said no one had been hurt. Children who played near the old site said the ground felt warm even in winter. Adults told them not to linger there. The truth became a shape without a name, something everyone sensed, something no one said.
Stories don't end when people disappear. They end when no one remembers them. And this one was almost allowed to end that way. The family who had lived beneath the church did not vanish in a single night. They faded. The wagon that took them away rolled east at dawn. No one in the town recorded where it went. No one asked what would happen to them. They were simply removed from sight. And for the town, that was enough. Within weeks, the fire became that unfortunate accident. Within months, the church became the old church site. Within years, the people beneath it became something strange that happened once. No names were spoken. Names give weight to memory. Weight makes people uncomfortable. The land, however, did not forget. Grass refused to grow evenly over the filled hollow. In winter, snow melted faster in that one patch of ground. Dogs avoided the spot. Horses balked when led across it. The old people noticed. They did not explain it. They just walked around it. A few settlers swore they could hear tapping beneath the earth at night. Most laughed it off, but they still walked around the place. Years later, a boy named Thomas lived near the former church grounds. He found a small piece of wood in the dirt one afternoon. It had been carved into the shape of a crude animal, not finely made, but made with care. Thomas showed it to his grandmother. She went pale. She told him to put it back where he found it. He asked why. She said some things were not meant to be taken. That night, Thomas dreamed of a room beneath the ground. People were sitting quietly, waiting. When he woke, he buried the wooden figure again and never spoke of the dream. Decades passed. A surveyor came to mark property lines. He found a blank space on the old town map. The church had existed, but there were no records of who lived there, no records of the fire's aftermath, no names, just a structure listed as lost. The surveyor wrote in his notebook, "How strange a place can exist so fully and leave no paper behind."
His notes were later misplaced. In private moments, some elders admitted the truth. They said the family had lived beneath the church for years, that everyone had known, that no one had wanted to think about it. They said the family had been grateful. Then they paused and corrected themselves. They said the family had been quiet. Silence, they had learned too late, was not gratitude. It was survival. The settlement grew. Roads were built. Children played where the church once stood. The story thinned into rumor, then into superstition, then into nothing. But guilt leaves a shape, and people stepped around that shape without knowing why.
This is not a story about a burning church. It is a story about how easy it is to accept something wrong when it is quiet. It is about how suffering becomes invisible when it does not interrupt daily life. It is about how people convince themselves that if someone does not complain, they must be choosing their situation. It is about how communities rewrite memory to avoid responsibility. The family beneath the church did not haunt the town. The town haunted itself. History does not forget. People do. And when people forget, the ground remembers for them. If you walk long enough, you will stand on places like this. Places where something wrong happened quietly. Places where no marker stands. Places where the story only survives because someone finally chose to tell it. So the question is not what happened beneath the church. The question is, how many places like this exist where no one ever told the story at all? There are no heroes in this story, only witnesses, and those who chose not to be witnesses. The family beneath the church never asked to be remembered, but forgetting them was a choice, and remembering them now is a choice too. Some stories were buried on purpose, not because they were false, but because they were true. Somewhere beneath ordinary ground are stories that were never written, lives that were never counted, and truths that waited for someone brave enough to say them out loud. And once a story is told, the ground is never silent again.